Welcome to Straight to the Point. I'm your host, Representative Joe Diorsi. In a world of long-windedness, I'm here to deliver you the capital news in 10 minutes or less. So, let's get straight to the point. This is Joe Diorsi, and this is the Straight to the Point podcast. And joining me in studio today is the representative of the second best legislative district in the state, Mike Jones of the 93rd. Welcome, Mike.
Thank you for having me, Joe. I appreciate it.
Tell me a little bit about the 93rd.
93rd is kind of indicative, I think, in most ways of York County. Good diversity of population we have. I represent York Township and Springfield Township and all of the boroughs within, which is basically Dallastown School District. So you could generally call that small town and suburban. And then you get down in, I have Shrewsbury Borough out through Fawn Township with all of the Hopewells in between. So Hopewell, North Hopewell, and East Hopewell. And you got the big bedroom communities in Stewartstown and Shrewsbury with a lot of people working in Maryland, and also fairly agrarian. A lot of agriculture, obviously, out in North and East Hopewell and Fawn Township.
Yep. And the 93rd is my birthplace, which is why I say it's the second best legislative district in the state.
I would take issue with that, and obviously I think it's clearly the best, but I'll defer to you since you're the host.
So, Mike, one of the topics that continually comes up, of course we serve on the Labor and Industry Committee together, is competitiveness or lack thereof in our state. You know, we often hear our governor say that he's, quote, competitive as hell, yet we have a lot of shortcomings here. So as a point of data, about 40,000 people left our state last year.
Correct.
Which is bad. We've lost a congressional seat in the federal government. Why are people exiting the state?
I will say that part of the population decline, I think in general, people are having fewer children. You actually see, but with that said, obviously we're losing a lot of people, particularly to North Carolina, South Carolina, Florida, and so forth. It really comes back, Joe, to all of the onerous. We have a very bad tax environment, and then we have a particularly onerous regulatory environment. It is just so difficult to do business in Pennsylvania. And I know this because I was in the private sector most of my career, led a great company in York County, and worked for many of the biggest and best companies in the world as we consulted for them. And many times Pennsylvania isn't even on the radar because it's just, and with that goes not only the jobs, but the young people, the children of those people that are working there that we need, and we'll touch on this here in a minute, that we desperately need to staff some of these positions. So as bad as the tax environment is, the regulatory environment is even worse. And as you said, the governor is saying that he's open for business. I don't think the Democrat legislature, our counterparts on the other side of the aisle, are hearing what he's saying because, as you know, Labor and Industry Committee is really indicative of just some outrageous policies that they're putting forth that only make this problem worse.
Yeah, and you mentioned the Labor and Industry Committee. Again, we serve on that with a few other all-stars, I would say, from the Republican side. And we're constantly considering bills that would make this problem worse, which is why we're so animated in committee, because we see the problem, we've identified it, and these very pro-union, anti-small business, anti-business bills would amplify the problem, would it not? Yeah,
I hope. Our hope and sort of assumption is that these are basically, I call it kind of payback bills. The Dems have been in the minority for 12 years. They got to, pass some bills to appease their base, which is, unions and similar. Just some crazy ideas the other day, as you know, talking about paying unemployment to striking workers. We had private sector OSHA, as if OSHA wasn't bad enough, or public sector OSHA, as if it wasn't bad enough in the private sector. 32-hour work weeks, on and on and on. Mandatory this and mandatory that. Now, our assumption is that, of course, that they're dead on arrival in the Senate, but it's troubling, especially when they're not offset by anything in the other direction. Things like net operating loss carry forward, regulatory reform, a lot of good common sense things that we could be doing that aren't what I call it may not be sexy bills that make the front page of every newspaper, but there's some simple things we could do that would make a tremendous difference on the business front and turn around some of these trends.
Yeah, so you've talked about the hundreds of pages of regulations that are on the books that nickel and dime,
right.
These employers and small business owners. We've also touched on the taxes and the fees. The corporate net income tax is still relatively high. You and I both like that it seems to be agreed upon that that's to be coming down gradually, incrementally in the coming years. Another thing that I hear, and I'm sure you hear, is the permit situation. Delays in these environmental permits. Can you speak to that and how that affects business?
Yeah, I think I remember, as you know, one of our local heroes, I would call it, certainly business heroes in York County, is the Kinsley family. And John and I were not close friends, but we were, casual friends or acquaintances. And he had told me one time when I was first running for office, he said, Mike, a permit that we can take 3 months in Virginia could take 2 years here in Pennsylvania. And businesses just don't have the time. And I saw this firsthand working for, as I said earlier, consulting with some of the biggest and best companies in the world looking to build distribution and manufacturing facilities. Time is money, and they're not going to mess around with those permits. So one simple example of that would help a lot, not so much on bigger projects, but our colleague Dave Zimmerman from Lancaster has a great bill that would keep DEP out of any projects that are less than 5 acres. It's currently 1 acre or less. And there's a lot of projects in that 1 to 5 acre range. DEP is always talking about being short-staffed. Let's take some of that burden off their plate. And that's very consistent with federal standards. That's where EPA gets involved as well. And that's a lot of what we're trying to do, by the way, Joe, on the tax front, is just get to match the federal level, which would be a huge improvement. Yet we continue to shoot ourselves in the foot in what we should be an economic powerhouse with all of our natural resources. And we might have potholes, but we actually have great logistics, a great location, great road network, and we're just constantly in the ranked 40th, 45th in the nation in economic development. It's terrible.
Yeah, and I've personally heard from builders. In particular, York County builders, who say it's extremely laborious to get these NPDES permits. And I've even heard from a builder from Northern Maryland who said after they finish their current project, they're never coming back to build.
Well, and we see the, I don't know if you'd call it the converse, but we see them exiting Pennsylvania as well. I've got some friends that have been, that have developed a lot of properties here in Pennsylvania, and they're starting to look to invest in North Carolina and other places. It's and the other thing on the demographics, you shared a lot of it with losing population. The only group that's growing is the over 65 demographic. And I love seniors, but you can't run a state with retired senior citizens. We need people to fix roads, to build houses, to come out and fix our plumbing and our electrical and put a roof on. And I think where it's going to get particularly bad, we're on the precipice already of a disaster, is in nursing home care. Finding people to take care of these baby boomers that are living longer than ever, which is great, but are exiting the workforce and don't have enough adult children in place to take care of them. We can't find welders and machinists for $80,000 a year. Where are we going to find people to work in nursing homes doing extremely admirable and critically important work, but low paying and tough work? We're on the verge of crisis there.
Yeah, and let's talk about that with our lightning round here. So we hear all the time in the General Assembly of shortages, teacher shortages, nurse shortages. How can we address that? At closer look, at least from the educational side, I guess there's a shortage, but it's not exactly as simple.
Well, I think the teacher shortage is exaggerated for political purposes. I'm not saying it doesn't exist in some parts of the state. Obviously, hiring teachers in the inner city and so forth has always been particularly tough. But certainly healthcare, manufacturing, which underpins our way of life in the 93rd and in York County in general, we're sending way too many kids to college. I'm not opposed to college, but it's about 45% of them will have no degree at all in 6 years. So we need more emphasis on vocational and trade schools. We need to get 17-year-olds more involved in doing actual work. We made a little progress on this with volunteer firefighters, for example. So we're not talking about unsafe environments, but if you think about it, we allow a 16-year-old to drive 80 miles an hour around the Baltimore Beltway, right, in rush hour traffic. Yet a 17-and-a-half-year-old can't drive a lift truck in a fairly controlled environment in a warehouse. And that's important because if we get kids in the workforce, a lot of them are going to see these alternative career paths, whereas high school tends to skew them so heavily to college. So we need to get creative there. Maybe even look at getting more sophisticated on immigration, particularly in the healthcare. If we've got people coming from Ukraine or Guatemala or wherever it may be, if they're willing to work and do it the right way, just like we have labor, in the agriculture industry and so forth, maybe we can get them more involved in healthcare. So we've got to start thinking outside the box and get creative, but it starts with keeping our businesses here in Pennsylvania.
Yep. Good points, Mike. Thanks for joining me. In studio today, Mike Jones from the 93rd Legislative District. This has been Straight to the Point. Visit repjod.com/mypodcasts.